Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call to order this month's Governance and Policy meeting. I'd ask everyone, if they're able to please rise for the acknowledgement of traditional lands. As someone based in Scarborough, I'm operating on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations. This area has been under the care of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, Mississaugas of the Credit, and any other nations that may be unrecorded. The territories that encompass Toronto are under a number of treaties, including the Toronto Purchase of 1805, the Rouge Tract Claim submitted in 2015, and the Williams Treaty of 1923. Conversations around the Toronto Purchase Treaty began in 1787, and settlement between the Government of Canada and the Mississaugas of the Credit was only reached in 2010. This took more than 200 years due to lack of guarantee of land rights, inclusion of Indigenous voice, and proper financial compensation. This is important to highlight as it shows how slow justice has been for Indigenous peoples. I'd like to acknowledge my settler privilege and extend my solidarity to Indigenous communities whose lands I continue to benefit from. Many of us have come here as settlers, immigrants, or refugees. I'd also like to acknowledge those who came here involuntarily as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. Thank you. So I'd like to welcome committee members, trustees Earhart, Hassan, Nunziata, Pei, and Sriskandarajah. In the room, we're joined by Trustee Dawson, Trustee McLean, and Chair Chernos Lynn. Any other trustees joining us virtually, if you can please share with us that you're here.
Madam Chair, it's Trustee Shan here as well.
Trustee Laskins here.
Hastings here.
Trustee Pei here, or sorry, I'm Trustee Pei here.
That's never happened before.
You're right here. I apologize. I'm not there in person. I'm sorry, Trustee Pei.
Trustee Williams is here.
Trustee Motiak here.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. I'm here, present from China.
Ooh, fun.
It's 4:30 a.m.
That's commitment. Well, thank you, Trustee Pei.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Yalini.
All right, welcome. That's
Thank
why
you, Chair.
Trustee Earhart gave you a shout out, because she's happy to see you long distance.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm so happy to see everybody from the other side of the globe. Okay.
Thank you. Up next, we have,
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
thanks. Up next, we have the approval of the agenda. We do have from staff, we're sharing that. Which one is it? Review of policy purchasing phase 5 and recession of policy PO 226 architect selection has been pulled from the agenda. So now we're looking for an approval of the agenda. And move in our seconder, please.
Trustee Shan.
Vice Chair Shan.
Trustee Pei.
And Trustee Pei, thank you. Up next, we have declarations of possible. Pardon me? Oh, all in favor? Any opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. Up next, we have declarations of possible conflicts of interest. We'll give folks to come off mute or share. Seeing and hearing none, we'll move on to delegations. Delegations are another form of parent, student, and community voice to address committees of the board. This ensures members of the public can provide input on board's decision-making process. Delegations are reminded that they are to provide input in a respectful and constructive manner and not to engage in behavior contrary to the board's code of conduct, human rights, or delegation policy. Speaking to the Learning Opportunities Index policy, we have our first delegate. Welcome, Lori, if you can hear us. Okay.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Oh, we can. Welcome, Lori.
Hello?
Hi, Lori. You have 5 minutes to speak. I'll let you know once your time has run out. At the end, please stay on the line as there may be questions of clarification for you from trustees.
Okay, great. Ready to start?
Absolutely. Please go ahead.
Great, thanks. Well, thank you for the opportunity to give feedback on the Learning Opportunity Index policy work plan. I'm Lori Green, a member of the ICCAC since its inception, which means I'm old, and a family physician from St. Michael's Hospital, working part of my time in one of the model school pediatric clinics at Nelson Mandela Park Public School. I'd like to start by giving kudos to the TDSB for instituting the Learning Opportunities Index to provide staff and resources in an equitable way across Toronto Public Schools. The index was informed by similar pioneering work in the Legacy City of Toronto School Board, and in principle, this is an important foundation for equitable education delivery. In practice, it must be constantly evaluated in the changing demographic and operational landscape to ensure it's accomplishing its goal. I applaud the board for this process of review. Like most schools, can you hear me okay? I'm getting feedback.
Apologies, yeah, we just had someone off mute, but please go ahead.
Okay, like most tools, its efficacy depends on its components and its implementation. Historically, it's important to learn from previous iterations and adapt to changing demographics and the consequences, either intended or otherwise, of operational changes. Thanks for sharing the proposed work plan and for the work that went into this review. The following's my feedback. Number one, regarding transparency and communication regarding the LOI. This is essential to building public trust in the LOI process in an accessible format. Having a variety of literacy levels, like basics and beyond the basics information guides for parents, students, and the community would support this. This would allow the expert user to reproduce the index and community members with lower literacy levels to understand the process. Secondly, components on the index. These variables have changed over time, understandably with changing Toronto demographics and other variables. In 2007, 3 of the variables were removed: housing, immigration, and mobility. Some of these continue to be variables in other school boards, which seems logical due to differences in communities. Relevant to the discussion today is the mobility variable. This was removed because research discovered that mobility did not come from income instability, but rather from programs of choice, and reflected those with higher income, not lower ones. Thirdly, the consultation regarding the LOI policy. Historically, an ICCAC member sat on the LOI Policy Review Committee in 2009 when this policy was created. The current recommendation of focus group appears to be less representation on the committee. There are different levels of community engagement and focus groups, or the involved style of consultation. Suggested in the work plan is at the lower end of engagement continuum. In line with equity principles, it would seem important to have community representation as well on the LOI Working Group Advisory Committee, i.e. more like the inform and collaboration models of higher community engagement. Fourthly, regarding the implementation of the LOI, in 2009, a specific clause was added to the LOI policy draft based on ICCAC feedback. That's number 412, which says an analysis shall be generated every 3 years to assess the impact of the use of the index and allocation of resources to schools during the previous 36-month period. The analysis shall be presented to the board and its advisory committees. I may have missed it, can't find it on the website or Google search, but I do see it in the multi-year strategic plan that was due in 2019, and understandably, that might not have happened. Finally, responsiveness to concerns following LOI ranking changes is important. Current concerns from a number of model schools read programs of choice, and the LOI have been raised. A research-informed decision requires additional data analysis, and this is an essential and equitable step to being responsive to communities facing disadvantage. To recap, number one, transparent communication about the LOI, from simplified language to reproducible detailed data. Number two, recognition that programs of choice affect the LOI and essential school resources in ways that may not reflect community demographics. Number three, the work plan on LOI policy review should include an advisory committee with ICCAC representation as in the past and include community membership. And four, ensure no harm is done to communities facing disadvantage with the current index until further analyses are available. I'm really looking forward to the LOI implementation analysis. And finally, the LOI is an important tool in achieving equity in public education, and the review policy is a pivotal part of that goal. Thanks for your work on this and for consideration of these changes.
Thank you, Lori. Just give us a small moment. We'll see if there's questions of clarification for you. Trustee Laskin,
Sure.
please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Lori for her 25 years of service to the Toronto District School Board, for her insights as ever, for her willingness to put herself out there, and that I really appreciate her comments. And I know one of my colleagues is planning to propose some of those amendments. So I just want to say thank you, Lori, and great to see you, even if it's virtually. Take care.
Thanks very much, Shelley. Same.
Thank you. Do you have a question, Trustee Laskin?
I don't.
Okay. Trustee Dawson, please go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. Hi, Lori. I just want to echo Trustee Laskin's comments about, thanking you for your long years of service with the TDSB. I really do appreciate your participation on the ICCAC committee, and we have been working behind the scenes quite a bit to address some of the concerns with the work plan flagged by you today in your delegation, and also by the committee. So as Shelley mentioned, hopefully you'll stay listening in, and there will be some feedback being put forward by trustees. Thank you.
Oh, that's great news. Thanks, Alexis.
Thank you, Lori. Seeing no further questions, thank you so much for your time, and we're going to move on to the next delegate.
Thanks.
Hi, Elizabeth. Are you able to hear us? If you can, press *6 and you can unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, yes, we can. Welcome, Elizabeth. You have 5 minutes to present. We ask that you please hold on. Once you're done, there may be some questions of clarification for you.
Welcome, Elizabeth. You have 5 minutes to present. We ask on.
And if you can, unmute. If you are listening to the public feed, if you could just
Yeah,
mute that.
I just had to turn that off. I apologize.
No worries, no worries.
So most of you probably do not know who I am. My name is Elizabeth Dewey, and I'm an associate professor of economics at the University of Toronto. I'm also the co-director of Future Skills Research Lab and the incoming director of the StatsCan Research Data Center. At U of T, I'm appointed to a number of departments, including OISE, Rotman School of Management, and the Institute of Health Policy Management and Evaluation. So I'm an expert on school finance and education policy, and most of my work, as evidenced by my appointments, is cross-disciplinary and highly quantitative. The reason why I'm here speaking today is because I believe the LOI is an incredibly important tool, and that it's time to take a substantial look at it during this policy review. The pandemic, as you know, has shown a spotlight on the inequities in our city, and an efficient and adequate index to relieve these inequities is vitally important in moving forward for our children. I do want to thank TDSB staff and everybody involved for creating this measure and continually focusing on this issue. It is noticed and very much appreciated. I've recently been conducting academic research on the model school program and the effect of programs of choice in Toronto, which has allowed me a lot of time to think about the LOI and its purpose. We know from research that money matters in education as long as you spend it at the right time and on the right students. We know that infusions of dollars to poorer schools lead to positive academic results in terms of higher graduation rates and test scores. And my own research has shown that infusion of dollars significantly affects the resources special needs children receive and their outcomes. So the LOI drives a lot of resource allocation decisions, and I think it's vitally important for us to get it right. I'm fairly concerned about how opaque TDSB is and how they're using the LOI in driving resources. I know it affects model schools. It's also used how TDSB allocates staff. But despite the policy saying that detailed information about the LOI should be public, I don't believe it is, or I can't find it. As a school-based measure, I worry that LOI might be missing a number of important aspects, including programs of choice, gentrification, residential sorting, and concentrated pockets of poverty. It's possible that alternatives may be needed. It's possible that the index should be constructed at a program level, or that variation within the school needs to be emphasized. So in addition, as a school finance researcher, I think it's important to also understand what's driving the changes in LOI scores of individual schools over time and find out if it's accurately capturing the lived experiences of the children in these particular schools. Despite my research on the Model Schools program and reading the LOI policy documents, I think a lot of information is still unknown and should be answered before moving forward with approval for the next 3 years. In the policy, it was just mentioned by the other delegate that there's supposed to be an analysis. I've never been able to find this. I've looked very hard. I also think the literature index scan that was included in Appendix C is inadequate. We're basing these important allocation decisions on the LOI. We need to be confident that the measure is the best we can do with the information and research available to us in 2023. I think that you should consider having an expert review panel examine the new research and include a review of indices used across the world, not just in Canada, and make recommendations based on this new scan. And I'd like to see this done prior to approving the LOI policy. I am well aware of the significant budget constraints that currently exist for TDSB due to lack of provincial funding, and therefore I'm willing to volunteer as an expert for this task, and I'm sure there's many other experts that would be too. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today, and thank you for all the work that you do.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thanks so much for presenting to us today. We do have a question of clarification for you from Trustee King. Trustee King, please go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you, Elizabeth, for coming and speaking with us today. I just wanted to clarify, one of the suggestions that you made was reviewing to see if the LOI is accurately capturing the lived experience of students. I just wondered if you could clarify and elaborate a little bit more on what that might look like. How would that accurately get captured? Or how could it?
Personally, I think a lot of it has to do with the variation within school. So it might not be surprising, but I live near a school that has had a huge change in LOI scores and or LOI score over the years. And it's not clear to me that the change in the LOI score is actually affecting the children in the same way, right? So the gentrification based on French immersion program. And I'm concerned that the variation within school is sort of clouding what we're seeing in terms of the actual measure. And so in terms of capturing the lived experiences, I want to know if these children, if on average, they actually have had different experiences in where they live, their income level, and whatnot. I don't think the measure is capturing that correctly at the moment. Hopefully that helps. We're not seeing anybody.
Thank you. No, I'm here. And just in your experience in the work that you do, you feel like there are kind of tools or ways to accomplish that TDSB could be utilizing?
I believe so. And I believe that it's at least important for people to sort of take a step back and look at sort of the state of the art of the research and what is being done and can we do it better. In the US, there's been a lot of new work in terms of this kind of measures. And so I think it's important for us to look and say, can we do it better? Not saying that we're doing it poorly at the moment. I'm not sure that we have any evidence either way. And that's sort of what bothers me as a parent of kids at TDSB and also as a researcher.
I understand. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Those are all my questions, Chair.
Thank you, Trustee King. Elizabeth, we have one more for you from Trustee Earhart. Trustee Earhart, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks very much for delegating today and to all the delegates. If I'm not asking questions of any others. I wanted to check in around your understanding of what this review will encapsulate. I will be asking of staff that. I'm trying to grapple with what we think based on the documents we received the review is going to encompass. So is it your understanding that the review encompasses both like the LOI formula review or the LOI definition, or that it's sort of a look within the LOI, or that it's a look in terms of its use and applicability and revisiting across when we next sort of look at the within LOI review. I hope I made sense in that question.
Well, for sure. And I think that's actually a thing that needs to be discussed because it's very unclear to me what, it's talking about the LOI policy, but within the policy is the formula and the ingredients to the formula. And so I think it would be difficult to approve the policy without thinking deeply about what the index is capturing. Is it the right things we want to capture in 2023? In terms of what you guys are voting on today, I do not know, but I think that it would be very difficult to separate the two. But it was not clear in the documents that I looked at.
Okay, so what I'm hearing as part of your delegation is that when one is looking at the use of the formula through the policy review, one would necessarily also have to think about within the formula based on how it's defined. Okay.
Absolutely, yeah. You can't do one with the other, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for coming in today. Seeing no further questions, we just want to thank you for your time and for sharing with us.
Thank you.
Moving along, our next delegate tonight is Valerie. Hi, Valerie, can you hear us? If you press *6, you can unmute yourself.
You are.
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you. Welcome, Valerie. Valerie, you have 5 minutes to present. We ask that you hold on at the end of your presentation. There may be some questions of clarification for you.
Okay, thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Valerie T. I'm a parent on the parent council at J.R. Wilcox Community School. Our school is located just south of the Allen Road Expressway. We serve 360 students from grades JK to 8, and there are 2 diagnostic kindergarten programs. We have an incredibly diverse population at our school, with families recently arriving from countries such as Cameroon, India, Brazil, Trinidad, Jamaica, Portugal, and Mexico, to name just a few. Our ESL numbers have more than doubled in the last year, and equitable learning opportunities are on top of mind and are a continual focus of discussion at every parent council meeting. I want to underscore that I'm not here to speak specifically about our school, but a broader issue that's impacting schools citywide, and that I empathetically understand that the LOI policy is meant to objectively rank schools, and that this kind of triage system must be incredibly challenging for administrators and policymakers to navigate. I understand that resources are limited, especially with more cuts expected. That said, I'd like the opportunity to use our school as just one example of why a full LOI policy review is imperative and deserves due time, attention, and resources. The big takeaway that I'm hoping to illustrate is that the current policy is not reaching pockets of poverty that exist in neighborhoods that are rapidly gentrifying. Our school was a model school for a number of years, but we dropped in ranking. Just recently, our LOI score has dropped from 151 to 221 in less than 5 years, when food scarcity, lack of medical care, increased learning diagnoses, and language barriers have all escalated dramatically. Due to our drop in ranking, we have lost a partnership with a daily food bank. Our school has had to create its own food bank and clothing bank, but they're lacking. This is because few families are in a position to donate. A few children in every classroom are hungry and require additional food beyond the snack program. Currently, only 50% of families can afford a $100 cost for an overnight outdoor education trip. And with our drop in LOI ranking, we will be charged the full amount for the trip, which may mean that it will be removed from the roster due to lack of affordability. Through our drop in ranking, we have lost our vice principal, our medical clinic, and will soon lose our half LOI staff. There are many health and mental health issues at the school, and many families have lack of access to medical care. Our principal has tried in vain to establish relationships with local community clinics to help families gain much needed medical attention. Our parent council is hustling to raise funds outside of our community because we can't rely on donations within our school, and try and ensure that children can attend field trips and grade 8 graduations and programming. Our fundraising efforts are barely a drop in the pond, and we are often heartbroken at council meetings trying to prioritize basics by the voting members. The LOI policy is meant to focus on staff and student well-being, and yet we're not able to address external learning barriers, and this is demoralizing to say the least. We would like more transparency in how the LOI score is calculated, because clearly something's being skewed and not reflective of the pockets of poverty throughout the city. On my street alone, there have been nonstop new builds and renovations, yet none of these new or neighboring families attend local TDSB schools. Wealthier families are attending private schools, the Catholic Board, and French immersion programs outside of our neighborhood. For instance, Arlington Middle School, once a TDSB school in our neighborhood, is now a Jewish day school, and many affluent families are moving to the neighborhood as a result. This means that many families that are generating an above average income for our neighborhood are not attending J.R. Wilcox. In addition, other factors may be skewing rankings, such as underrepresentation of ESL families in the census data, undocumented families, and parents with degrees or higher education from other countries, as this does not always equate to equitable employment opportunities in Canada. It seems that the LOI data is not capturing many external barriers that impact our school, and we'd like to see additional added calculations. We know our school is not unique. Perhaps there can be some proxy measures to mitigate this skew, such as collecting data on the number of new immigrants or undocumented families attending a school, the number of students per class who access food banks or clothing banks, number of children in a given neighborhood attending private schools, other schools, or specialty programs such as French immersion or gifted programs outside of a catchment area. I'm almost done. Number of undiagnosed children due to lack of medical access who require additional support and help, and the number of renters versus homeowners. We want to support our community's families. Yeah,
Valerie,
sorry.
your time has finished. But if you want, you can always send your written submission to trustees, and we'll definitely take a look at it further.
Yeah,
we
thank
do
you.
have some questions of clarification for you, starting with Trustee Dawson. Please go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. Valerie, thank you so much for your delegation. You've raised some excellent points, particularly around private school attendance. And so I am familiar with the area and the impact that Leo Beck has had on some of the changing neighborhood dynamics. I had a question. You mentioned field trips and loss of funding. Can you explain that in a little bit more detail?
Sure. I'm new to the school, but my understanding is that, and also my son has Down syndrome, so I'm new to the school, and he has very little support as well. But what I understand is that there was funding for our school, like some type of way that our fee was lower because our ranking was higher. The LOI ranking was higher, so the students were only charged $100 for this 3-night overnight trip, and that 50% of the families at our school could afford it. So we are raising funds so that the students that couldn't pay that $100 so that everyone could attend. But now that our ranking's lower, we will have to pay the full amount of that 3-night over trip, and then that is unaffordable for us as a parent council to raise that money for everyone to attend and have enough food and like all the other things, like the things that we have to. Our last parent council meeting was 2.5 hours trying to decide and prioritize what we were going to vote and spend our money on, and it was agonizing, to say the least.
Okay, thank you. And so just to clarify again, the 3-night trip was to a TDSB outdoor education
An
center?
outdoor education program, yes.
Okay. And then around trouble connecting with local organizations to support families, have you connected at all with Unison Community Health or any of the other local health organizations around in the neighborhood?
I wish that I could answer fully. I don't want to give misinformation. I'm new to the school and I'm new to parent council. And so I don't want to give misinformation, but my understanding is our principal has tried. I mean, she is just working so hard to try and find solutions to some of this lack of medical care.
Okay, thank you very much.
And we used to have a medical clinic at the school. There was access prior to the pandemic.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
There's one more question for you, Valerie. Trustee Laskin, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Valerie. I really appreciate you taking the time, and thank you for volunteering at J.R. Wilcox. It's a school within my area. Can you please share your deputation, well, obviously with all of us, but specifically to me? I have not been in touch with your principal, or your principal has not been in touch with me on these issues, and I would be happy to connect with council, with your principal, and connect through the local counselor as well to try to bust through some of the roadblocks you've been having. So I appreciate the deputation, and we'll definitely be following up. But the issue fundamentally that you raise in terms of pockets of poverty within every school and every community, I think it's really important for transparency that the LOI formula does take into account just parents at the school and not the neighborhood the school is in. And that is my understanding of what it does, but we will clarify that during the discussion with staff. But I sincerely appreciate you coming and raising this issue. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Trustee Lax. And that is the point that I'm trying to make and hope what happens. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Valerie. There are no further questions for you. So thank you so much for coming in and your presentation today. And moving on, our final delegate for tonight. Hi, Tyler, welcome. Can you hear us?
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome, Tyler. You have 5 minutes to present. We ask that you hold on at the end. There may be some questions of clarification for you.
Thanks so much. I want to express my gratitude to the committee for the opportunity to delegate today. My name is Tyler Rooney, and I'm here to discuss the Learning Opportunity Index Policy Review. I've been the school council co-chair since 2018 at Dr. Rita Cox Kinaminagok Public School, was formerly known as Queen Victoria Public School, which is in the neighborhood of Parkdale, located in Ward 7. Our school had been a model school status since 2011, but lost it in 2017. Between 2011 and 2017, our school's LOI moved from 64 to 151. And it came as no surprise to the parents and staff at our school that this jump in LOI coincided with our school adding a program of choice. Our school houses the elementary gifted program for Ward 7, and it doesn't take too much analysis to realize that is how our LOI change happened. Students in our gifted program are bused to our school from all over the ward, and it's typical to hear that students have transferred from schools such as Howard, Swansea, Fern, or Garden Avenue. And of the 470 elementary schools ranked in the LOI, each of these are ranked above 425, well into the 90th percentile of the most affluent schools in the LOI. So my personal situation is a small sample size, just one. I believe it's incredibly telling and representative of what our school's LOI score represents, the averaging of two very different communities. I have two children in the regular stream and one in gifted, and the stark differences in their classrooms make clear which communities are represented in either program. My son's gifted class only has 2 other students within walking distance of the school, and my other children have entire classes within walking distance. My son's gifted class is majority Caucasian with only 1 Tibetan student. My children in the regular stream have a class which is quite aligned with the experience of Parkdale, with many students of Tibetan and South Asian descent. Placing programs of choice in schools like Dr. Rita Cox Kinaminagok should be encouraged to create access and diversity in education, but this should not also come with the removal of access to much needed resources and finances. It is the genuine antithesis of an equitable outcome. With the loss of model school status, our school lost access to health support services, such as the Gift of Sight and Sound program. I personally know families who only identified their child's need for prescription glasses through this program. It impacts staffing, such as special ed resourcing, which is so badly needed in all of our schools, particularly schools like ours with large numbers of ESL, LEAP, and MID students. It impacts the financial access to school trips and the required busing. This I've seen firsthand. In 2017, I was lucky enough to attend my son's kindergarten field trip to the Ontario Science Centre, which was fully funded at the time. And although COVID has impacted field trips, I've been delighted to rejoin his grade 4 and 5 gifted class on field trips to the ROM, City Hall, and multiple trips to the Science Centre. This is in stark contrast to my children in the regular stream who have not done any field trips since COVID. Furthermore, the lack of transparency into the LOI calculation and its total impact on budgets, staffing, and resources is incredibly opaque to the school community. Upon hearing of losing their model school status, administrators and councils are left to scramble to figure out what shortfalls will exist and how to possibly accommodate them. Additionally, the LOI model impacts the school model system that has a hard cutoff for the first 150 schools without any consideration in gaps and needs. This was painfully made clear to our school, which ranked 151st and was behind the 150th school by less than 1/100% in the LOI score in 2017. I would strongly urge this committee to conduct a full policy review of the LOI process. The process and calculation was to take into consideration programs of choice and how they impact model school status. Exactly how these calculations are done and the resulting impact to schools should be completely transparent. For a program intended to help provide greater equity across our schools, it would be a travesty that it actively creates further inequities for those most in need. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tyler. One moment, you have a question of clarification from Trustee King. Please go ahead, Trustee King.
Thank you. Through the chair, not a question, just a comment. I would like to thank Tyler for sharing yet another illustration of the impacts of the LOI in the Parkdale neighborhood. We heard a delegation earlier from another neighborhood, and I think it just really exemplifies how we're seeing trends and similar impacts across different areas of the city. I know that this has been a particular pain point for this community, and it's in fact the very issue that got me engaged as a parent at that school in school governance. So I'm happy that you're able to add some voice to this. I know that our neighborhood school of Parkdale Public has been impacted in the same way, having lost their model school status within the last couple of years as well. So again, just thank you, Tyler, and nothing further. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Trustee King. Seeing no further questions, thank you, Tyler, for coming in and presenting to us. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Okay, now we'll move on to Community Advisory Committee report. Changing a time to a consultation process, and I'll pass this over to, Associate Director, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Through you, Chair, I am pleased to introduce Superintendent Yuchon Robinson to bring us into the room of our Parent Involvement Advisory Committee report and to review the recommendations that PX submits to GPC this evening. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, through the chair. One of the recommendations or points that were brought forward at the last meeting was regarding the rationale for semesters. And I want to say that what was shared at that meeting was as follows, that the semesters need to align with other boards and other boards so that there is consistency. Semester students, the movement between schools is also another factor why we as a board have continued to maintain our semester process. I understand that this year we had approximately 1,000 students move between schools, and from time to time that is certainly important. It also allows staff movement without disrupting student learning, fewer unfilled teaching positions, and change of staff moving between full year and semester schools. I also know that it provides opportunities for students that for a variety of reasons may require a discretionary transfer, that there is an opportunity to access all of our secondary schools when that comes forward. We also have, through staff thinking that semester costs less than full year models in terms of the schools, and instruction specifically in terms of students to focus their attention on fewer courses at one time, thereby increasing their chance for academic success. Students with special needs are supported in that way better. ELL students are supported. Semesters also follow post-secondary models in colleges and universities. In addition, semester learning promotes student well-being. Students have half the number of courses, culminating activities, and exams at the end of each period. I also would defer to my colleague Diana if she also wants to add further information regarding the rationale around semesters.
Thank you. That was very fulsome. And the only piece that I would add is the access to central co-op programs and college programs that semester students aren't able to, full year students aren't able to do, and semester students are able to do. So thank you.
Thank you, Diana. And if I may just add a bit of context through you, Chair. We have a procedure that outlines a process for changing a timetable that outlines an 18-month process. Last year, there was, and this procedure is under review. Last year, there was a interim procedure put into place where schools were able to come before a committee made up of staff representatives from a variety of schools in our district. And through that process, decisions were made, obviously, to be moving our system to a semestered model for the reasons that Yutan and Diana articulated. There were a couple of schools where parents were not quite sure about semestering, and we heard actually delegations regarding requests for our IB schools. Staff have been highly supportive and in touch with the IB coordinator and the principal in building a shared understanding with our parents in regards to the benefits that have been outlined for equitable access. So I'm pleased to report that we think that both schools are feeling well supported. We have a plan in place for next year that is, we think, meeting the needs of the parents who came forward, and we will continue to support the school in their understanding of our migration to a fully semestered model, which puts us in line with all of the GTA. Thank you.
Thank you, Associate Director Sresco, Executive Superintendent Robinson, and System Superintendent Pantiotopoulos. We do have a comment from Trustee Laskin. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, through you, Madam Chair, to staff. I put that comment in prior to Associate Director Sresco's comment. My question was going to be, was there a central process by which principals could make requests if they had any concerns about the forced changes during COVID and the fact that we weren't going back? And what I heard was, yes, there was a formal central process. So I just want to confirm that's my understanding. Through you, Madam Chair, to staff.
Through you, Chair, to Trustee Laskin, yes, I can confirm that occurred, Trustee Laskin.
Thank you. And is there some flexibility now, given the transitions to fully semestered, that some courses might potentially stay all year within the semestered school? Is there that flexibility being provided so there could be a little bit of a mix depending on the program? Through you, Madam Chair.
Through you, Chair. Yes, Trustee Laskin, that's exactly how staff have been supporting our parents and the staff.
That's excellent. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to staff for trying to facilitate resolutions that parents of the schools can support. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin. Trustee Dawson, please go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair. So this is a question that I've had on my mind since we heard delegations from families of students in the IB program. So they'd moved to a full year program from a semestered program, to my understanding. And so what was the decision-making process around that? Because it feels like families were not on board with that.
Thank you. Through the chair, I invite Diana to respond to that question.
Thank you. So we did meet with parents at Parkdale regarding the IB and heard many voices from parents and students. Following that, there was a meeting with the IB coordinator, the principal, and further discussion over a few days to talk about the experiences and the worries that parents and students had. All schools had the opportunity to come forward, and in this case, the school did not, and heard afterwards their concerns. The IB coordinator and the principal have shared a letter with the school council, but also with all parents in the school, looking forward to next year and working specifically around a couple of courses that they feel would benefit for 1 year of a transition with a full year program. The other courses are going to remain semestered, and they are very satisfied that this will be a successful transition for the students. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Through the chair, I really am encouraged to hear that there was that kind of dialogue and working with the community, so thank you for that.
Okay, seeing no further comments or questions, may I get a mover and seconder to accept the recommendations?
Sriskandarajah.
Trustee Sriskandarajah. And a seconder.
Nunziata.
Thank you. And we'll vote on eScribe. Do you want us to do a show of hands or vote over eScribe? Maybe eScribe? Okay.
Shan in favor.
Vice Chair Shan in favor.
Trustee Earhart in favor.
Okay. Trustee Earhart in favor. Trustee Rajagopal Singham in favor. Trustee Pei, how do you vote? Trustee Pei? You do?
In favor, Madam Chair.
Through you, Chair, if I may, it's very unusual for me to interrupt a vote. If I might clarify, if I didn't make this clear, the work that staff have done and the recommendation that is on screen really would be running counter to the work staff are continuing to do. So just for GPC's consideration to be supporting staff, referring it back to staff so that we may continue the work with families.
So the vote was open. I think people already cast their vote. Okay. Okay. And that has carried. Moving on, we'll move on to staff reports now. And the first item to be discussed is the Learning Opportunities Index. This has been removed, I believe, from their agenda. No. Yeah, Learning Opportunities. This one's. Okay, so I'll turn this over to Associate Director Strisco.
Thank you very much, and through you, Chair. Trustees, staff are so very pleased to be with you this evening, sharing Phase 1 of the review of Policy 067, the Learning Opportunities Index. The documents before you outline the plans for the policy review, and staff wish to obtain trustee directions. That is indeed Phase 1. The Learning Opportunity Index, or LOI, as it known by, is a very important tool employed by our board that enables us to align and differentiate resources to students and schools based on the needs we determine through data and evidence gathering. I know that this policy has been anxiously awaited for review, not only by the Board of Trustees, but by members of the public, some of whom spoke so eloquently this evening and joined us. I would like to take this opportunity to note that our LOI data index depends a great deal on our student census. And our student census is now live for our students and families. And I am asking each of us, please to collaborate with the communities we serve to make them aware of the fact that the census is out and to please encourage their participation. It is available in many languages. So we are really going to be communicating through all of our channels repeatedly. But if I could ask your support and any members of the public who are online listening to please join us in that communication. It is now my pleasure to invite Senior Manager David Cameron and Policy Coordinator Vitaly Plotnikov to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Any questions or comments for this report? Trustee Earhart, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I thought one of the staff was going to comment. So I know that this is a really important review for members of my community. I've heard a great deal about it since I began as trustee. And I also know that it's a very important report for the ICCAC. And there was a few questions that I had asked to staff just prior to this that I wanted to just repeat publicly for clarification. One of them is about the 4.12. My understanding is that the 4.12 report, which assesses the impact of the use of the index, was not put together during the previous 36-month period due to COVID. Is that correct?
The chair, I can just jump in.
Thank you. Through you, David. Go ahead. Sorry, through you, Chair, to David.
Yes, that's correct. COVID interrupted that, the impact evaluation.
Oh, okay, thank you. And have we ever had one of those reports take place? Like, do we have any documentation of that report? Just now having the backdrop that ICCAC had put forward a recommendation to be done.
Through the chair, we have one from 2007 that we did dig up that was from an independent contract group. But no, we haven't, to my knowledge, since I've been here in 2018, there hasn't been an impact evaluation per se of all the different ways the LOI is being used in terms of that. And some of them have been mentioned tonight. Model Schools is obviously one of them who's participating in that program, and staffing with the other, I heard.
Okay, thank you. And another question I had was just around the potential role for ICCAC in the review, just stemming from the delegations. Would a working group be contemplated with ICCAC, or would we envision that perhaps an expert working group, which is something that is under consideration, could include membership of ICCAC? Like, how do we envision the role of ICCAC as opposed to some of the other, like beyond some of the other CCACs?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Although I think all CCACs will hopefully have an opportunity to provide feedback in terms of this broader policy, but yeah, there usually working with expert panels is quite typical in research team. We work with expert panels in almost all big projects, off and on with the LOI as well, although that has never been something that has come to the board because it's procedural, to my knowledge. So that's not a problem. Actually, working with expert panels, we think that's a really important part of doing reviews, and especially with something that's trying to describe poverty and relative poverty across a city the size of Toronto. It would be a really important piece. So that's something that we would actually encourage in the process of the procedure of the methodological part of this puzzle is actually every 5 years. The last one was 2020. So as the policy is outlined today, and Vitaly, you can help me if I'm wrong on this, it would be 2025 where we'd have a new methodological review. However, having said that, I imagine this policy could trigger or expedite a review in a much faster way if that was the interest of the board. But and in terms of consultations, we envisage that we would have a consult for sure. We could have and we're open to consultation in relation to having CCA like ICCAC at some point providing feedback. There is a 60-day consultation or a 45-day consultation period in fall, I believe, for policies in general. So that's certainly a possibility as well in terms of steps inside of this policy.
Okay, that sounds great. I also, and just through the chair, you had brought up the methodological review, and that came up in the deputations as well. And so in terms of what is being proposed right now to be in scope for this review, the LOI, if I'm understanding it correctly, the LOI definition is in the policy. So the definition of the LOI could it be part of the review, but there's the last methodological review was in 2020, and it wasn't necessarily the intention to do a methodological review alongside this.
No, as the policy, well, as it's written today, but this policy can trigger any number of things. And I think I'd welcome Vitaly to talk about that. It's a high level policy around the use of the LOI and some of the general pieces of the puzzle in relation to the application of the LOI and the general pieces of the puzzle about a methodological review, when it does, when's the recalculation, those kinds of procedural steps inside of it. So I would imagine that the policy could trigger a quicker review, a different review of something like this. But the policy itself, this overview is not the methodological review in and of itself. Vitaly, am I right in my understanding?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I think, David, you are correct. At the same time, the information that was obtained during the methodological review informed our work in terms of development of the work plan for the policy, because as we all realize, the LOI index is the compilation of certain variables. This is one thing. And during the methodological review, staff looked at other school boards and looked at their equivalents, let's say, of LOI of that index and what variables, components that index included. So that was useful information for work that we are about to initiate. And as David mentioned, during the policy review, both aspects, the LOI index itself and also application of the index in resource allocation, both parts will be reviewed, looked at during this policy review. This is my understanding. David, correct me if I got anything wrong. Thank you.
I think the only bigger issue would be, and this is where this policy P067 is a little bit different in relation to that. So the procedural, the methodological procedure, as it's detailed in 4.1 in this policy, 4.10 in this policy, it just is it's triggered every 5 years. So and there's a certain high level details, but in terms of the things that the trustees have brought forward with the delegates and the concerns that are being expressed to the board, the details of the procedural, the methodological review would be subsequent after this. I would think after this policy was constructed. So as it's designed now, and so concurrently, I don't imagine that we would be doing a methodological review in the details inside of the methodological review, including expert panel, factors analysis, global reviews, different broad, like the stuff that we typically do, and also some additional stuff in terms of consultations and things like that. I don't imagine that would happen aside by this policy review, as from my knowledge, Vitaly. I would imagine it would happen when this policy was accepted as the updated policy of the LOI in general, and that would trigger a methodological review after, but I might be wrong on that.
No, I think this is what I meant. Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to chew on that for a second. I may come back with other questions. So I'm just going to ask 2 more quick questions and just thank you so much through the chair. The first point in the Appendix B was made reference to a policy equity assessment, and I just wanted to understand what the policy equity assessment was, and how it was different from any other item that was referred to in the report, like the policy 4.2 assessment report.
I can take that through you, Madam Chair. So this is the reference to the equity assessment tool for policies that staff is using during policy reviews and policy development. This tool is posted on the TDSB public website in the section related to policies. If you click on policies, there is a submenu with this document and information about the document. And essentially, it's the tool that helps staff to identify potential impacts of policy provisions, policy decisions, and kind of triggers the mechanism for consideration any actions to be taken to make sure that that equity principles outlined in the equity policy are met. So that's the document that this report refers to. And we will be happy to email this tool to all trustees, but as I said, it's also posted on the public website. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. And just one last question for now, and it's just a reminder because this is the phase 1. Following the phase 1, and I'm going to present some recommendations for some additions that we can discuss after. I just want to make sure that everybody has a chance to answer questions and reflect upon the delegations. After this approval, what is the next step? Like what happens next? And then when might something come back to board?
I can take this one through you, Madam Chair. So this is phase 1, exactly as you mentioned, meaning that if GPC, the committee recommends and the board approves, we will officially initiate review of the LOI policy. So the following step will be, and as part of this official initiation, hopefully the board will approve the work plan that is attached to this report. So once the work plan is approved, staff will be using this work plan as our roadmap to work through existing policy and draft revised policy, draft revisions. Following internal reviews and making sure that staff, all related departments have a chance to review and provide their feedback. Once the draft is completed, we would be moving into next phase, which is public consultations, and that phase will include mandatory elements, consultations for 45 days, I believe, and engaging all community advisory committees. We mentioned the focus groups and other methods that will be again spelled out in the work plan. So this is the next phase. After that, staff will analyze feedback received during the public consultations and engagement of our key stakeholders, and will be making further revisions to the draft policy. Following that, we will be able to bring the document, the draft policy, draft revised policy to the Governance and Policy Committee for consideration. So that's kind of key steps following this phase 1. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. And just thanks so much for answering my initial questions. As I said, I may come back on the list, but I want to give others a chance to ask questions. And I'm I'm so grateful to see this coming to board at this time. So just thanks very much to everyone for the work.
Thank you, Trustee Earhart. Next is Trustee Dawson. Please go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. I just want to say, yeah, thank you so much for bringing this forward so fulsomely, and also for taking the time to meet separately with Trustee Earhart and I yesterday to discuss this in more detail. I have a question about the census. Is it still possible for parents to declare or give permission to declare whether they give permission for their child to do the census in class? Is that still a possibility?
Thank you through the chair. I'll invite Senior Manager Cameron to speak to our timelines.
Thank you. Yeah, through the chair, it is still possible. We have there needs to be a step in there that parents need to contact the teachers, and this is specifically for parents of children in grades 4 to 8 to tell them that that they want their child to do the census in school. If they wanted to do it at home, that email has been sent to them as well. The difference in the census, if I might just add a couple things to provide context, the challenge this year, in previous census periods, we have used what would be considered passive consent, in which we would announce we'd send emails to all primary parents and caregivers about that the census is occurring from here to here. Here's the survey, and it will happen on these dates. And if you don't want your child to participate, let the school know. And if we didn't hear anything back, the census would have been done in school, in classes, in seats, and that's why we can get 90% of our students on the census. Because of the Anti-Racist Act in January, from the Anti-Racist Directorate, consent flipped into active consent, which means that you literally have to survey twice. So we go out to get consent first, and the parents indicate a choice. And then from that choice, there's options in school with parents at home, or indeed no. Because that's a very difficult thing, we don't get high return rates. So when we've gone out to the system, as an example, in grades 4 to 8, we've only gotten 60% of our parents haven't responded at all. So that's why we're having a little bit of a challenge in collecting information for the census in this particular phase in the spring.
Thank you, through the chair. I would strongly recommend, if it is possible, working with schools to provide paper copy consent forms to parents in student backpacks. So in my experience, just as a school council chair, for something like pizza lunch, let's say, parents are more inclined to respond to something that goes home in a backpack, maybe. So at least you're hitting them from a couple of angles. So I don't know if that's something that we might consider at this point.
Thank you, Trustee Dawson. Yeah, that's a possibility. I appreciate the idea, and we're puzzling out a bunch of different ways of collecting more participation rates and stuff. So appreciate your thoughts.
Okay, thank you. And just one last point of clarification. So you mentioned that families might have to contact the classroom teacher to give that consent again. Is that correct for this time round, or was that a past action? And I ask this because I have a child in grade 6, and I did not understand that I had to contact his teacher.
No, you didn't have to initially, because we had front loaded it, so we had everything. If parents don't have to do it that way, in terms of that, when they first initially got that email, because they didn't respond, that was a default no. So the next path has to be something they have to contact the school. And we were worried that parents would contact the principal, and the principal would have handfuls of students in all these different grades, and it became very, very complicated for them to actually deal with that. So the solution there is for the parents to contact directly the teacher. Initially, they got an email and everything was automated out of the database that we have for students. So the initial response would have been an automatic response. The list would have gone right to the school, in other words, but we just didn't get any response. We didn't get, 60% of the folks didn't respond to that central email.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so just, to think about sending home that paper copy, but then also with instructions for the classroom teacher to follow up with the online link too. I think parents tend to scan for the actual teacher's email rather than a central TDSB or even the principal's newsletter or something like that. So with those kinds of clear instructions, I think you probably get a higher uptake. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Dawson. Trustee Srisukhandaraja, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, staff, for all the work that you're undertaking on this front. I just have a question, or a couple of questions. Through the chair, why do we choose, just, hearing the delegations, why do we choose to look at, sort of neighborhood factors as opposed to students in the building factors? So just to give an example, we look at families' parent makeup, so if they're sole parent or not at the neighborhood level, as opposed to the students who actually attend the school.
Through you, Chair, if I could ask Senior Manager Cameron, please, to respond to that question.
To the chair, thanks for the question. With caution on this one, just because we're going to start getting into a methodological deep dive here, but I'll just give it a surface level question that probably won't be appropriate for some people who really want to tuck in. I appreciate that people who really want to tuck into the methodology. We use postal code estimates for postal code work in these areas, and we use Environics and StatScan to do it. We've compared it with the main reason we do that is it's very difficult to get the kind of information we're trying to get in terms of, as an example, income information. It's very difficult to get that directly from parents. You just heard us talk about the census and how difficult it is to get identity-based data from the census. So while we consider different options, and sometimes we've even balanced between how parents, as an example, JK parents to grade 3 parents do the census, and they provide income levels in that census. However, we only get 65% of those parents. So it's a difficult process to collect identity-based information or direct information from parents and put it into the LOI to get consistent, reliable, and valid information. Estimates, postal code estimates that we get from StatScan and Environics and things like that. They correlate very closely to achievement, and that's it's a very important part of the LOI methodology, in the sense that these are external stress factors of stress that are very closely associated to variance in student achievement and outcome. So that's one of the main kind of criteria of why those factors get into that. And we look at estimated estimations in postal code in those factors through the methodological stuff. But all of this, I appreciate that it's not very transparent in the appendix we offered it. That's just a summary of things. All of this, you can trigger this kind of conversation in more depth and more transparency and things like that through this policy, this overarching policy inside of what's designed in the policy in P067.
Okay, thank you. And that's what I thought and the rationale, but I think, and I asked the question because I think it's really important that we share with parents why we go this route. Because I don't think, like as the delegates mentioned, I think there's sort of confusion about why we're sort of looking at sort of these external data sets as opposed to the data sets we have. And I think speaking to the fact that our data sets aren't complete, I think would help sort of at least move that conversation along. Because I think my sense from the delegations was there's some confusion of why we were going this this way. So follow up to that question, and sort of beyond this, but just thinking of the advocacy piece. My understanding is that we are not mandated to collect this data, and we don't have the power to do it, right? The student census is completely voluntary. Does the ministry have jurisdiction to mandate, for example, that that we collect this kind of data? Or maybe I'll leave the question there and then follow up if I need to through the chair.
Through the chair, please, Senior Manager Cameron, please feel free to respond to the questions as they arise.
Thank you. Through the chair. Yeah, the ministry could mandate that. The Anti-Racist Directorate, through the Anti-Racist Act, requires all public organizations, public service organizations, to collect race-based data, and that's now it's an act now. So it's we're mandated to do that. So if the ministry was so inclined, I imagine they could do something like that. I don't know necessarily that. Right now, as it stands, they collect certain information in school registration forms. Some of that information, though, it becomes complicated with ethics. Even now, as an example, why registration forms collect indigenous information but no other identity groupings, and why we would put a registration form with non-binary, though I appreciate it, given kind of the vulnerability in terms of mandating that in the school registration to get your child into school gets complicated as well. So always with this kind of perception information and this kind of information, the more you mandate things, the more difficult ethically you find yourself, especially given that it's public education and universal access, and it's meant to be something that builds certain kinds of relationships with communities that have had trauma before with schooling.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And just to sort of move on from that, I know sort of in the policy and the delegations, you know, and I think generally there's this sort of sense that we allocate a lot of our resources based on our LOI. But I just want some clarification because I think it is more nuanced than this, right? So my understanding is that we, for a lot of things, reading coaches, if I'm correct, it could be, I could be wrong on the specific staff, that we don't actually allocate based on LOI solely, that we rather allocate it equally to our learning centers, and then within them, they will, you know, factor in LOI. Which to me isn't actually using LOI the way it should be used and having a more school-based focus as opposed to having a learning center model. But I would like to hear from staff if my assessment of this understanding is correct.
Through the chair, Senior Manager Cameron.
I'll start, but I think other people have on this call hopefully have a good sense of some things, because the LOI is used to guide lots of different policies and resources. As an example, staffing uses it as part of an equation that also includes class size and things like that. Different groups of units, different policy units, different resources come up in relation to that. Maybe there's an envelope of money that comes into a policy shop or a unit or a team, and they think, well, that's kind of got it through the LOI. So there's those kinds of things that are happening on a day-to-day in a basis in terms of how the board might use or smaller units might use the LOI. To my knowledge, Model Schools is a direct. So in other words, it's a direct program. It has a suite of different things that are capacity and resources and opportunities. Some of them have been mentioned by the delegates today. Health clinics as an example, potentially field trips. There's 5 essential practices in Model Schools that touch on pedagogy and community relations and things like that. So it's a pretty robust and profound program that actually is fairly detailed, and some of it is more effective than other parts of it, I would imagine. And that's another thing. So one of the interesting parts of the LOI conversation that's come is we don't want to confuse the LOI, which is the tool, in relation to some of the ways that other policies and other resources and other practices and procedures and strategies might use this to guide or direct different ways of using different ways of working with schools in terms of bringing resources over. So if you were to look at, I think it's 4.4, talks about the LOIs to use as a way to concentrate resources in places that have the least amount of economic capital or the most amount of proportions of high environmental stressors to aid that in an equity perspective. So it's complicated, and there's more nuance than I think that than you had inside of your question in relation to how that's being used. But that again could be part of 4.12 in relation to describing all the different possibilities in terms of evaluating how the TDSB uses the LOI to impact learning.
Thank you through you, Chair. I appreciate that answer. And I think, I asked that question because I think we need to think this very carefully and keep this sort of in the back of our mind, because I do think there's often a general understanding with the public and perhaps even within the boardroom that often we are, sort of directly servicing those that have the highest needs, but that's not necessarily the case, and that it actually gets filtered through these other things, as was mentioned. And so I think we need to make sure we keep that conversation going, because I think though the policy, the section you read out does mention that we use that in terms of servicing those who are underserved the most, I don't actually think that's the fulsome discussion. I think there's more layers to this, especially when it comes to the way resources are allocated through the learning centers and what equal distribution means versus equitable distribution. But I think we'll have many more chances to have that conversation. Thank you so much.
If I may, through you to the chair, through to Senior Manager Cameron, David, could I ask you to just extrapolate for trustees on the LOI methodology and its definition, and the fact that it's not part of the review? If you could just provide context for trustees' deliberation.
Yeah, you mean it's not part of this particular part of this particular policy review in relation to getting into the different factors that make up the LOI, the methodology of the current LOI, and all of that, just for clarification?
Thank you.
Yeah. So currently, at the moment, the LOI uses 6 factors that have been, and we look at a variety of factors that are beyond those 6 in the methodological review, just for information, all the way out into, we explore well-being, we explore different ways of looking at factors. We look globally, we do deep reviews. The summary review is, as people probably have guessed here, and I appreciate it's opaque because we haven't really exposed it out to that degree. We've produced a summary of things inside of it, but it's a fairly sophisticated review that goes through and against what I've just said around looking at environmental factors that correlate or are associated with outcomes of achievement. Typically, when you look at work in this area, psychometric work in this area, when you're looking at variance and explaining variance of outcome for students, typically a teacher runs around 0.14 to 0.18 or 14 to 18% variance, explaining variance or change in outcome for students. And the factors that are part of the LOI and the environmental factors that have been in play that we've called that often are associated with poverty and things like that, and social capital, SES, those factors tend to run around 60 to 80%, depending on the kind of analysis that people are doing in relation to this methodology and social research. So they are big. The relationship of these factors to achievement is a very important part of why they exist in our LOI. Right now, there's median income, percentage of families who are below the low income measure, percentage of families receiving social assistance, adults with low education, which is high school, adults with university education. These are factors that I think that explain a lot in relation to, are associated closely in relation to student outcome in public education, regardless of jurisdiction. And the last one is lone parent families, is currently the 6 that we have in relation to this. And they're estimated by postal code as a proxy, and the students who live in that postal code those then make up the school aggregate number. And the last bit I'll just quickly say is it's weighted over 3 years because of volatility and mobility. So we look at it as a 3-year run, 0.25, 25%, 25%, 50% of the current year in the recalculation process is what we currently have right now. But again, all of this I'm excited to review, and as it's triggered by policy 067, and with expert panels, and certainly listening very closely to ICCACs, and as lots of the delegates and the trustees have mentioned on this call, it's complicated. We have a lot of poverty in our city, and a lot of things that are amazing about our city in terms of areas that we would consider poor or impoverished or with economic scarcity. So I want to be cautious about the ways we use these languages in our communities in terms of how we think about communities. But it's a complicated process of describing kind of environmental stress, and it's an important process. So I hope I touch on some of the things, Louise, that you are hoping for in terms of that response.
If I could pull out a couple of more details, because I think it is in top of minds of trustees. Thank you through the chair. Senior Manager Cameron, where does the review of the methodology come into play from this first phase? When will you and your team be looking to amend elements of that?
As the policy is written today, if the board was to approve the policy that is in play right now, it would happen in 2025. So it would be a year from next January 2024, we'd begin a methodological review. If in this policy that the board would like or indicate a quicker time frame for a new review, then it could happen as soon as the new policy is accepted by the board, and it could be triggered immediately as soon as this policy, presumably if the renewed policy, as Vitaly described it, was accepted as the policy going forward. And inside that policy, inside of 4.10 that is written right now, that a methodological review could be triggered immediately, then it would happen right after that policy was accepted by the board.
Thank you. And last question, just for trustee deliberation. Is that timeline, if the Board of Trustees were to give direction to quicken the timeline, is that possible for your team?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Thank you. And back to our speakers list. Trustee Trisconadra, were you done?
I just have one question,
Sure.
and I
You have
don't know if
36 seconds left.
Yeah, no, be quick. And I know we're gonna have a separate conversation about methodology, but just while I have you here through the chair, I know you look at things like low income, and I just wanted to know, are you relying on sort of Stats Canada's recommendations, or are we going to factor in sort of the reality of living in Toronto and what low income might mean here compared to sort of a general sort of understanding, or do we focus more on medium income? And I think I'm out of time, so that's my question.
We try to do a lot of the different work. Contextualizing poverty is really important, and it's difficult, especially when we're talking about pockets, because it's a measure for 583 schools, or I should say 472 and 106 schools, because there's two, one for secondary schools and one for elementary schools. So yeah, it is. It's part and parcel. One of the things that is kind of one of the things that is important inside of the environmental factors is they need to be reliable across and consistent across the city. For 250,000 people or 171,000 elementary school students and so on, they need to have. So one of the things that a method that would look deeply into a singularity or a case study or work through those kinds of experiences would be more difficult to get consistently, although a consistency across one place to another place to another place in terms of the ways that students are experiencing poverty and so on and so forth. In terms of that, as a good example of that might be a colleague of mine did a study of charter schools in Detroit. I talk this story a lot because I really like it. Looking at charter school effects in a very homogeneous board because of the families with economic capital had moved out of that city. So it was a homogeneously a board defined by economic scarcity in terms of inside Detroit inner city. But it had a charter school movement that was doing better on Michigan State tests. And the study was to ask the question about what's the pedagogic effect of the charter schools given the relative homogeneity of that particular group of schools and students inside those schools. And what the research found is that it wasn't anything to do with the economy. It was to do with the ability, the family network, aunts, uncles, sisters, brothers, having a wider social net created opportunities for students to get across the city because charter schools are geographically dislocated. And the public school system, as it's defined in Detroit, was about catchment and close proximity to the building. So the kids that tended to go close to their home were also kids that didn't have the kind of social net available to them. So I just flagged this up as being an interesting component of trying to figure out when you're trying to map out what is an environmental stress and how do we understand environmental stress and what are the variables that we should put into play. Always within this work, we think about the association of the relationship it has to student outcome and a variety of different outcome measures in terms of that. We look at both grades and EQAO and a variety of different ways to think through how closely associated are these factors in terms of the factors that we're using to student achievement. And that's kind of a handle for us in terms of the relationship they have in terms of environmental stress and their explanation of challenge in terms of student outcome.
Thank you. And up next on the speakers list, we have Trustee Laskin and Trustee Earhart. We'll just go to Trustee Laskin first before we start round 2 of the speakers list. Please go ahead, Trustee Laskin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So it's really hard in a system this big to use any kind of factor and apply it to all schools and get it right. I completely get that, and I get that we do the best we can. So I'm wondering if staff have thought about, not necessarily in terms of the policy, but in the procedures, what kind of flexibility can be built in from a system perspective, requiring differentiation of resources, financial resources to address issues that aren't addressed by simply the application of the LOI. So I'm wondering if staff can think about, and potentially not for this budget cycle because this would require some thought, but I'm not talking about X amount of dollars per learning center to be applied by superintendents. I'm talking about a more centralized fund that principals with the support of superintendents, potentially even school councils with the support of principals, with the support of superintendents, or school councils with the support of their PIAC reps. I'm not sure how it would work. But it just seems to me that this is not the first case, especially with those schools that lose their designation and go farther up the line, but feel that their actual demographics haven't changed, but in relation to others, it has changed. I'm just wondering if staff can give that some thought from a procedural perspective and how we catch those that fall through the cracks in the actual implementation of the policy itself. That's my comment for staff to think about. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin. Trustee Earhart, please go ahead.
Hi, thanks so much. And I apologize if anything is repetitive. My child and co-worker came in for a little bit during part of the call, but didn't want to be on video. So I do think I heard responses around the methodological review. And so I did want to comment that I think, just given the deputations tonight and what I'm hearing from the community, is that there's very strong interest for the consideration of the LOI definition, methodology, and formula to form part of the review. And so I'm heartened to hear that that feels like it's possible to be within scope. So that's wonderful. I wanted to ask a little more, just based on the deputations, around programs of choice. We heard about gifted programs, around French programs, and just how they fit with the LOI, and just if staff had any comments around how that relates to the LOI or LOI policy, or the LOI policy review right now. I don't remember a French—
Point of personal privilege, Madam Chair.
Sorry, yeah.
Go ahead, Trustee Laskin.
Gifted is not a program of choice. Gifted is an actual designation.
I apologize.
Thank you.
I apologize, and I apologize to everyone listening. I'm new, and I'm going to get the words wrong. And I meant no disrespect. I understand that that the gifted designation, that what is offered at schools for gifted designation, and for those that is not a choice. And so my apology, my sincere apologies. But I wanted to know how. So perhaps it's not the word then, programs of choice. That may not be the right terminology to describe what I'm wanting to convey, that how changes what programs are offered where, how that affects schools and LOI, and how does that relate to this LOI policy review? I hope I framed that appropriately this time.
Thank you. And through the chair, Senior Manager Cameron, can you talk us through that?
Thank you, Trustee Cisco. I'll give it my best crack. Sorry, that was the CTA absent line for my kid who's always late. Apologies about that. So it has an effect only in the sense that if a French immersion program were introduced into a school, and the French immersion program drew from a different postal code from a different postal code in which these measures were significantly different. As an example, there was a high levels or high proportions in that postal code of parents with a university degree. Let's just take that one, for example. That would, because the size of the school, sometimes some of those huge jumps you see with a few of those schools, it started at 40 and then it jumped to 80, and then the next year it was 120, and the next year it was out at 170, 175, with a school size of 400 or something. Because of the proportions were increased in that French immersion program, it's a school level variable. It's a school level measure, right? So the reason why it's a school level measure, which is really an important construct, but of course we're going to get into this in much more detail when we trigger a new methodological review next year. But the reason why a school level measure is important in terms of the way the board would use it now is there's no way to disaggregate or separate what a VP, a vice principal, might do in a school in relation to having a school with a variety of programs in it that albeit these programs are drawing on students from different demographic areas in relation to that. Now, having said that, so a lot of because it's school level, because a lot of those resources are collectively owned. For example, playgrounds, vice principals, youth workers, health clinics. There's no way, in other words, to provide that to only certain programs in relation to the school level program. So that's one of the keys around school level measures in terms of how the LOI is currently being used. Having said that, if you look at the French immersion program from economic deciles, 15% of students in French immersion are coming from the bottom 3 deciles. So there is a level of students that are coming from income scarcity per se in relative compared to the other parts of Toronto in relation to these programs as well. So the programs aren't in that, and although it's a little bit different with the gifted designation, there is a huge disproportionate number of certain types of students in gifted programs and also in French immersion programs, as we all know in this call and presented in different times. Although the populations are diverse in these programs as well. So it's not exactly clean in terms of that program area, but generally speaking, and this is again with high mobility in terms of when families move in with higher levels of economic capital, higher levels of education and university education and so on and so forth, when they move into these neighborhoods, it has an effect on the LOI of those schools, because the kids who will go to those schools will pull on those factors, and that will be it will have a significant effect. So that's where you see most of the turbulence in the measure, is in the right downtown core, where most of that kind of mobility happens and where French immersion programs come into schools and so on.
Thank you, David. And through the chair, I think that Executive Officer Snyder can also be sharing information for Trustee Earhart in regards to funding. Craig?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. We do have also in our school budget allocation program supplements, and these are intended to be for high-cost programs. They can be used flexibly by the principal, of course, but for some examples are the secondary instrumental music program. Per credit, we give $45. Secondary arts, $13.50 per credit. Family studies, French immersion, middle school supplement, and we also have a support for special education teachers based on the number of special education teachers at a school. And then we have technical education program supplements for settings like construction tech, technological design, computer engineering tech as well, that support schools.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was all very helpful and I appreciate it. I just had one last question, and it was about information to be provided. And so I am going to recommend, and that there be some kind of descriptive evaluation around the use of LOI and allocating resources. So that's related to that 4.12. I believe that hasn't, that we don't have an up-to-date report on, that we could get, if we could get some kind of descriptive evaluation, maybe not a full assessment, but a description through this process out, that would be fantastic. I'm also wondering what other information staff feel needs to be put out to support community advisory committees and the broader public in effectively engaging on this area. So I've heard tonight that there are a lot of unknowns in the eyes of our public of the innards of the LOI and how it is used. And so I'm wondering if staff have turned their mind to what kind of information could be made available to support people to effectively participate. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, through to Trustee Earhart, please be assured that we will be developing a fulsome consultation plan, and part of that consultation plan will be a presentation that tries to explain the complexity that is the LOI. So thank you for that suggestion, and please be assured we will make sure that happens.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further questions or comments on this item, I want to thank Associate Director Srisco, Senior Manager Cameron, and Policy Coordinator Plotnikov for their work on this. And we'll need a mover and a seconder to accept their recommendations today.
Sriskandarajah.
Trustee Sriskandarajah and Trustee Earhart.
And Trustee Earhart, I wanted to move the additional considerations in the report.
Okay, did you have a motion?
Yes, I do. And I believe it was sent in advance.
Okay.
Don't know if someone can put it on the screen. If they can't, I can try to read it.
Nope, just give us one moment. We're just pulling it up right now.
No problem.
Okay, there it is. Go ahead, Trustee Earhart.
Yeah, I'll read out loud, and I that the following considerations be added to Appendix B. So and that's the B is the work plan, as I understand it from the attachments. Consideration of metrics that could be used alongside or in addition to current school-based LOI to consider impacts of programs of choice, gentrification, and other matters that may relate to equity and educational outcomes within schools. I think we heard a lot about that tonight. Development of a descriptive evaluation of the use of the LOI and allocating resources to schools to be included for information as part of the review. And I hope, and I really welcome trustee feedback, that this gets to the 4.12 element that ICCAC in particular had an interest in advancing. Posting of the working draft policy on the TDSB website for public feedback for 60 days rather than 45, simply because of the complexity of LOI. Consideration of the LOI definition, methodology, and formula form part of the review. And so that would be just to make it explicit that thinking about the methodology of the LOI review forms part of considering the policy as a whole. And then a focus group to include experts. And I just based on what we're hearing tonight, and I don't know whether it's a focus group or a working group, just making sure that ICCAC is included in that, just based on the history and hearing Lori Green's deputation in particular around the role that ICCAC has played in the past on this. So that's what I wanted to propose tonight. And I'd very much welcome feedback.
Thank you, Trustee Earhart. So this is moved by you, and do you have a seconder for the motion?
I don't at this time, but I don't know if someone here would be willing to second.
Yeah.
Sriskandarajah.
I heard Colonel Flynn first.
Thank you, Trustee Sriskandarajah.
Okay, so you've spoken. We do have a speakers list for you. Trustee Dawson? Trustee Dawson? Trustee Dawson? Did you have questions?
I did. Thank you, and through the chair. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much to Trustee Earhart for putting this together. And, you know, it's very thoughtfully done. And in particular, you know, responding to the requests of the ICCAC, I think is super important. I'm not on this committee, but I do appreciate our collaboration on this. I just had a question about an expert working group to include ICCAC. So they right now do actually have an LOI working group. So I don't know if it's semantics, but just to avoid the impression that all ICCAC members get to be a part of the expert panel, perhaps it could say something like an expert. The expert working group should include members of the ICCAC LOI work group. I just want to, I know ICCAC will be consulted, but I wonder what you think about setting the expectation that not all ICCAC members will be a part of this expert panel also.
Trustee Dawson, are you making an amendment or asking Trustee
I
Earhart
can't
to?
make an amendment, so I'm proposing
Oh.
a friendly.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, through the chair.
Please go ahead, Trustee Earhart. Your mic's up.
Thank you, Chair. I would gratefully put forward, provided Trustee Sriskandarajah also agrees, any proposals that Trustee Dawson has, knowing the significant work that she's done on this as well, and a big thank you to her. And so just anything around how that, I think what I heard was, I think maybe it should be an expert focus group, because the prior bullet references it as a focus group. So an expert focus group should include a member or a participant from the ICCAC LOI working group. Is that correct, Trustee Dawson?
Correct.
Right, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, Trustee Earhart, just FYI. So it was actually Trustee Chernow-Slyn that seconded the motion. Her mic wasn't working, so I don't think you could hear her. But we're going to make that amendment to your motion. Are there any speakers to that amendment? Chair Lynn, Chernow-Slyn, please go ahead.
That's okay. I have a working mic. It's exciting. Okay, so I'm in favor of this, and I also think that change that Trustee Dawson has suggested is a good one. And perhaps it's even something like the chair of that working group or something like that, because we want to make sure that you're getting experts in that statistical LOI, or experts who perhaps could bring outside experience of how these kinds of things have been done in other places, like we heard tonight. So maybe it's just a representative or something like that from the working group. That might make sense, because obviously they're going to report back to ICCAC. So it's not that ICCAC won't be consulted. But I think this is a really strong amendment and motion in general, and I am in support. And I'm also in support of the expedited process.
If we can get the language that Trustee Dawson had suggested, and on the speakers, have you shared? Do you have it? Do you have the language?
Oh.
She's working on it. Okay. There are two speakers on the speakers list. Trustee Sriskandarajah, was it the amendment on the amendment or the original amendment? Or the original motion?
The amendment, but is okay. Sorry, is there an amendment to the amendment, or was it just being included in? I guess that is an amendment. Yeah, to the amendment, not the amendment to the.
There's an amendment to the motion. Sorry.
Can I speak to the original amendment, or are we speaking?
There's only one amendment. Yeah, you can speak to the amendment for sure. Please go ahead.
Sorry, I want to speak to Trustee Earhart's motion.
Motion? Okay, just give us one moment. We're working on the amendment right now, and then we'll come back to you once we're on the motion. Trustee Earhart?
Are preparing what we think we heard, so we'll need verification from our trustees.
And Trustee Earhart?
Yes, so I just sent something. I'll just read out loud what I sent, and the proposal, it was for 5 sub.1. An invitation to this focus group should be extended to an expert from the ICCAC LOI working group.
Does that capture it, Trustee Dawson? Okay, thank you, Trustee Earhart. If you can share that with staff.
Yes, I've emailed it to staff, and my apologies.
Just give us one moment. We're just working it over here. Okay. That's it.
Through the chair, Trustee Earhart, we were both doing the same thing, so. I apologize if we've confused the matter, but we'll get the wording.
Okay. Trustee Dawson, does this capture your amendment?
Through the chair, yes, it does.
Okay. Are there any speakers to the amendment? Seeing none, we're going to open the vote on the amendment. Trustee Hastings is voting in spirit. It was Chair Noslin. In favor. Sorry. May we get a seconder for the amendment?
Susan Daraja.
Susan Daraja. In favor. Trustee Pei, how do you vote?
Oh, trustee in favor, Madam Chair.
In favor.
Thank you.
Trustee Shan, how do you vote? Trustee Shan? I think we can rule him as absent. Trustee Shan? Okay, we can mark him as absent. And that has carried. Now we're back to the motion. And I believe Trustee Sriskandarajah, you wanted to speak to the motion?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I appreciate the motion. And I think it fits well with what the delegations today mentioned. I just had one sort of comment, and I think it's just something we think through as this process, because I think this is going to be a long conversation over the next little while. And I do appreciate the concerns about gentrification. I'm starting to see that in sort of the western parts of Scarborough as well. So we sort of see that kind of trickling towards the east. But I just also want to raise attention to the realities of deepening poverty that's also happening. We can't speak about gentrification without talking about displacement. So when a place is being gentrified, that means the people there are being displaced elsewhere. And a lot of that displacement ends up often being sort of further to the east and further to the west, where housing is relatively more affordable. So just two of my most underserved schools this year had an unexpected amount of enrollment that our staff hadn't accounted for, and by a very large number, and one of the schools being a school that has 30% of its student population is served by or live in the local shelters. So I say that to raise awareness that that is also happening, and how I think we're going to have really interesting conversations, and as my question that I asked earlier about how we're going to calculate poverty, and what is low income, and what does that mean in a city like Toronto, and what does that mean in places where we live, where a lot of people might be house owners, but are either house poor, or they have their basements rented out to many people. And so all of those factors, right? So I just wanted I know we had a lot of conversations today, even during the delegations, about gentrification, but also keeping in mind the displacement that gentrification causes, and then what parts of the city that also impacts. So I just wanted to share that as we continue this conversation. But again, thank you for the motion.
Thank you, Trustee Sriskandarajah. Seeing no further comments or questions, we'll open the vote on the motion. And Rajagul Singham in favor.
Trustee Pei in favor.
Trustee Erhard in favor.
I think so, because it has. Oh, okay. In favor, yeah. Trustee Hassan, how do you vote?
Trustee Hassan in favor.
Thank you. And that is carried.
Chair Rajagulasingham, I'd like to raise a point of order. Regarding item number 5.1, the PIAC committee report regarding the timetable change, that was regarding a procedure. So I voted against it because we don't actually have the ability to, that's an operational piece that trustees don't get involved in. So I would just request a minority report on that item based on my vote and that premise, just so that that's recorded. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm just looking over to governance staff just to make sure they heard. Okay, thanks.
I think they have a glitch on the screen. They have a glitch on the screen.
Okay.
Okay. But
okay. I'm just not.
Okay, we do have a glitch on our screen here in the boardroom.
Yes, we cannot display right now, so we're trying to fix it.
Okay, no worries. Thank you. So we're done. Now we go to the next one. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next item, which is the fundraising policy. And I'll turn this over to Associate Director Srisco.
Thank you very much. And through you, Chair, it is our pleasure to talk about the fundraising policy, and I invite Senior Manager Gary Green to introduce this.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to speak on this. I would like to thank the policy team and my many colleagues and community members who have already provided valuable input to the fundraising draft policy provisions. Today, we're providing an update on the review of the fundraising policy P021, and you can find it in Appendix A, the draft preliminary provisions. The current fundraising policy was adopted by the Board of Trustees in 2001, and it's been a while since last been reviewed in June of 2003. So I'd like to take this opportunity to outline some of the proposed changes as outlined in the draft provisions, subject to consultation and future approval. Proposed changes include the addition of new provisions regarding a system priorities fund. It's currently known as a Central Equity Fund, and it has become depleted over time. And feedback has indicated that this is something that needs to be better articulated, promoted, and understood, and where additional tools are needed in order to make people better aware of how to contribute. And that's whether through employee giving, surplus funds sharing, or through other methods. Please note that the policy provisions make it clear that this is to be a voluntary process of fund sharing. However, through consultation, we will explore if that is the will of the communities involved to keep it voluntary, or whether certain thresholds for contributions should be considered. The proposed provision 4 states to facilitate improved equity of resources among schools with different socioeconomic status, a system priorities fund will be maintained to redirect designated or undesignated donations from external sources and or voluntarily directed surplus funds generated by school communities. So that will be up for consideration and for community input. Methods of fundraising will be explored further in the procedures, but we will document all feedback during consultation to inform the path forward. The provisions have also updated measures to align with current ministry guidelines and have added clarifying provisions regarding donations and online donations. Of course, when this was last put before the board, online donations was not a consideration at that time. I want to be very clear that we value community voice. To this end, we've already taken the measure of conducting a pre-consultation with PIAC beginning in February 28th of 2023, and they were offered several weeks to provide input. Further pre-consultations also took place in the form of one-on-one interviews with various stakeholders, including a trustee, student trustee, finance manager, and others as part of a Service Excellence Design Thinking Innovation Challenge. At the recent CVC, Chair Vice Chair meeting, we were also advised to provide a detailed outline of our upcoming consultation process, and this has been provided in our report. In addition to expanding the consultation period to 60 days from the normal 45, which given the summer break will actually be closer to 120 days, we will also ensure that staff will provide trustees with messaging for distribution via their weekly newsletters, which will include a survey link for consultation, and we'll provide this to you before the end of the school year. The feedback will be used to inform revisions to the draft policy, which will then be presented to trustees for consideration and approval at GPC in the fall. We are committed to a consultative process and will continue to adapt the policy based on input and look forward to bringing this back to you in the fall of 2023. I am accompanied by my colleagues in the policy department, as well as Jessica Delinda from the business development unit, and we welcome any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. First on the speakers list, we have Trustee King. Please go ahead, Trustee King.
Thank you for the chair, and thank you, Senior Manager Green and the team for putting this together and presenting today. I have questions and thoughts around equity in school-generated funds in particular, which I'm hoping is a part of this conversation. I'm hoping I'm having it in the right place. So, one of the things that I know that we see is that there are different attitudes and different capacities for school-based fundraising, school to school. So I've seen councils that do their fundraising very much based on a needs-based or a needs-driven basis. And I've seen other schools and councils where there's almost a culture of fundraising, as part of their community building and what they do. And we know that leads to just exacerbating some of the inequities that we see school to school. If I look at my neighborhood, specifically in the school that we heard about earlier, Dr. Rita Cox, Kinamanogak, they're 204 on the LOI. And in that 21-22 year that we just got the fundraising reports for the school generated funds, they had no fundraising in that year. Up the street, a school with 172 on the LOI did just under $1,000 in that year. And then less than a kilometer away, a school that's 434 on the LOI is raising over $18,000. So we're seeing a 20 times difference, within a walkable neighborhood. So I'm just wondering, in the work that's been done so far in considering proposed changes to the provisions, was there any discussion specifically around any mechanisms that would address equity at a more local level? So things like limits on fundraising or local kind of equity pools. Is that something that has already been talked about at this point in the process, or is that something that might come up in consultations?
Through the chair, thank you for the question. It's a very important one, and there's 2 points I'll make to it. One is around fundraising disparities across the system. We do see a strong linkage between LOI and dollars fundraised. I know that's not exactly what you were saying. You were saying even within the same communities, there's great disparity. I do believe that an important role that we can play in that is continuing to promote opportunities for fundraising. The principal plays a very key role in terms of identifying local issues and communities. And what I think this policy is considered is the important role that the school council plays along with the principal, and that the principal needs to be a guiding force in that as well. And so I think from a promotion of best practices, I think that's a strong role that we can play, but I do make note of your point, and it's something that we will consider as we draft the policy as well for consultation.
Through you, Chair, if I may ask A.D. Zucker to add some more detail. Thank you so much, David, or Gary, sorry.
Thank you, and through the chair. Section 3.1 of the policy currently talks about an equity fund that is maintained in usually through donation system wide and then allocated based on certain criteria. And part of the consultation that we're looking at is actually considering asking through the consultation whether there would be interest in or support for a mandatory percentage of fund raised at all schools to go into the central pot, and then to support the instances that you were referring to, Trustee King. So I think through the consultation, we'll learn more about that, and then we will discuss it at future meetings.
Through the chair, thank you for those responses. So what I'm hearing is that there hasn't been specifically discussion around a mechanism, but you're open to what you hear from community through the consultations. And I think hearing that, what I would just really encourage is that there are some very intentional questions that I think are open-ended for opportunity for other ideas and input as well, both at the focus group stage and at for the ones that are doing it by survey as well. I think the suggestions that we just heard are great, but I think also allowing some opportunity for community to also not just respond to how they feel about that idea, but really some dialogue and opportunity to talk about different ways that that might look. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you, and through the chair, we appreciate your suggestions and we'll take them into account moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee King. Trustee Laskin, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm supportive of the gist of these changes and look forward to the consultation. I want to remind folks that because schools do fundraise, we do differentiate funding, for example, computers. And if schools didn't fundraise, it would cost the board more money, frankly. Fundraising has as effect of community engagement, and some schools who can fundraise choose actually to more fundraise by having events and charging minimal amounts, making minimal amounts in order to have that engagement exercise, but not necessarily raise lots of money. What I especially like to see, which I don't think happens regularly, is the fact that how the funds are being used needs to be clearly identified at the beginning, and the principal's role in that. Because I know from experience in many of my schools, I always ask the question, how much is enough? Because, in some schools raise, $30,000 from one event. And it does bother me how much is enough, and why are we raising the money, and what is the mechanism for sharing, for opportunities. And I'm very proud of some of my schools twin with other schools. It's informal, it's not formal, because you don't ever want to stigmatize a community. But I think fundraising is an important initiative in a school community, but I also think there needs to be an understanding of what the funds are being raised for, how it supports the board, how the board supports communities that aren't able to do massive fundraising activities, and down the list. And I don't think we can make it harder for communities For example, I was privy to an email about barbecues, for example, that by telling communities they have to hire a company to do their barbecues really, just puts barriers to some other fundraising activities. So I think we have to be really mindful of that too. But I am looking forward to the consultation on this particular policy, and the fact that funds need to be, you have to identify the need that has to go through the principal. It should tie into the goals that the school sets, and how we as a system continue to be mindful of the differing abilities of communities to fundraise, and then how we support that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin. Trustee Earhart, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, and thanks so much for bringing forward this report. I appreciate seeing it, and my understanding, I just wanted to clarify, this is a status update prior to the start of consultation. So following our approval, the next step would be to prepare the consultation plan with the broad timelines and action plan of this update. Is that a correct understanding?
Through the chair, so this is the draft of the policy provisions that will make up the policy draft, which will go out for consultation, and then it will come back again through GPC in the fall.
Okay, thank you very much. And so the ideas for consideration, such as what we heard this evening, those will form part of consultation. Questions and ideas like that, correct?
Correct, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I'll just flag, and for context, I'm also very interested in this this policy, and so this is a meeting just chock full of things that I'm really interested in. So I think maybe GPC was the right committee for me. I also think this is one that my constituents will be very interested in. I represent a ward that has schools across the spectrum on fundraising outcomes and abilities from the information that we've received to date about our schools and council fundraising. So the timing is May 29th to October 10th, and I am concerned that it's going to be the end of the school year and the beginning of the school year, and a lot of time in the summer. And I'm just wondering, I see that trustees will be provided messaging. I think in my community, I may even be interested in holding meetings, and just to make sure that staff consider how we might educate and engage. Like for the policy, we may also need to educate around at the same time as we engage on the policy, and just if we feel there's sufficient time over that period to do it when the schools are closed. Thank you.
Through the chair, we had extended the time from 45 to 60 days with the consideration to think about making sure that there is plenty of opportunity. Perhaps a way to address that, if we're going to do something that we send out as a survey in before the end of the school year, perhaps we can do a little reminder in the fall and keep that open to give some additional opportunity for the community. And so maybe a trustees weekly in the fall as well could go out with the same survey, and we could capture all of that and incorporate that in the final documents if that would be helpful.
Okay, and through the chair, thank you very much. I think that could be helpful. I also am particularly interested around equity in our fundraising, and I wanted to ask around the equity fund, and if more information could be provided for trustees, perhaps through Trustees Weekly, on the fund, the status of the fund, policies around the fund, allocations related to the fund, just lots of information about the current fund, if that's okay.
Through the chair, yes, so we'd be happy to provide that. And I'm not sure the best process through which to do that, but perhaps if we share a message to all trustees with that information, if that's helpful, and then provide a contact in order to ask any follow-up questions.
One moment, Executive Officer Snyder would like to speak in.
Through you, Madam Chair, we'd be happy to prepare information for the trustees on the equity fund, and we can put that together.
Okay, thank you very much. And I know there's a lot going on, and so I really appreciate just what we have, if possible. And those were all my questions right now. Just thank you so much.
Thank you, Trustee Earhart. Trustee McLean, please go ahead.
I just wanted to, Trustee Laskin had brought up a point about the purchasing of computers and things like that, and it reminded me of my experience in another lifetime when we used to raise some money and get computers for the schools and whatnot. Is it still our practice that once supplies like that are purchased, that they become board property and inventoried in a school's inventory, in essence, freeing up our budget dollars that might be allotted for system-wide purchasing of computers, which in essence then allows for greater use of that budget to be used in different schools like LOI, with a higher LOI, so that at the end of the day, those purchased actually do in fact benefit, that allows the TDSB to, provide more machines to schools in need.
Thank you, and through the chair, a really important question. I am going to invite Craig Snyder, please, to respond. Thank you, Craig.
Through you, Chair. When the equipment is purchased, it becomes the asset of the board and will be treated that way. It's dependent on what the school purchases. For example, several years ago, the trend was to buy whiteboards. So that wasn't something that we at that point as a board endorsed buying through our central budgets. So it wouldn't change their allocation of funding to the school. Now that schools are starting to buy Chromebooks and other iPads and stuff, that could change how we have to support with our own board funds.
Okay. Trustee Hastings, please go ahead.
Can you hear me? Very good. What I'm afraid of, and I've heard this before, and we're talking about funding, what I'm afraid of is having, and I've seen this over the years, and as soon as you do it, where you say, I'm going to put my money into a pot so that everybody else can have access to it, that the funding, people that fund, the school that funds, the parents that fund, say, no, we're not doing this anymore. This is for I'm not being selfish, this is for our kids. This is for my school. This is not for anybody else's school. And consequently, if you get in there and you say there are, and this is another issue that I've seen come up over the years, that literally over the years, where it says, I have this amount of money and a lot of money, and the board says, I'm going to take your money from here, bring it to us, I'm going to give you back some of it. Again, that's not a good sign. You don't want to be messing around with something that works. So there aren't very many schools like that, but there are a few, and we don't want to interrupt with that. It's like taking something that works and making it non-functional. You don't want to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, A.D. Zucker.
Thank you, and through the chair, thank you, Trustee Hastings. And that is, right now, it is an optional for schools to choose to contribute to the equity fund. And your point is well taken, and I think through the consultation, we'll find more about what families are saying about and schools are saying about the equity fund and what a mandatory requirement would be, or as Trustee King indicated, maybe some other suggestions will come forward, and we'll take all that into account when we bring our report forward from what we've heard with recommendations.
I will continue in this manner. You have been warned. Don't do it. With come hell or high water, this is something you don't touch. Literally. I've seen it fail. So that's why I'm saying we don't want to go down the same path. Thank you.
And through the chair, if I may respond, there's a central premise in fundraising that if dollars are raised for a particular purpose, they should be used for that purpose and within a specified period of time as well. And so I think that's a very central and important feature, and also part of the reason why we had looked at any fund sharing as being voluntary, but also to consult on that is because of that premise as well. But we do recognize the importance of continuing to build a central fund that tackles system priorities as well, voluntarily, subject to consultation.
Trustee Hastings, is that all? Are you good? Okay. Oh, and Trustee Earhart, please go ahead.
I just can't help myself, so I'll just see if staff have any comments on this, because I know it will be a little bit before this comes back. It was my observation over the pandemic, and I was on a school council that voted in 2020, 2021 to make a voluntary contribution to another school as part of our fundraising efforts, knowing that all schools were challenged in that year in particular to fundraise. I know that fundraising was vastly affected during the pandemic for all schools. However, I also know that there was some overwhelming generosity, like what my school displayed and the school council when we made the argument that it was worthwhile to contribute to other schools in addition to our school. And so I'm wondering if staff have observations, what they've observed in the trends, both in terms of contributing to the fund or school to school contributions, and how that they were affected over the course of the pandemic as well. Thank you.
So through the chair, I'd be happy to take that and also turn to my colleague, Jessica DeLinda, as well, if there's anything that I miss out that she would like to add in. We did see a significant drop-off of fundraising over the pandemic, just because there were no real events or coordination, gatherings of people, that sort of thing, and that did hit very hard to a number of the schools. And similarly, there was not the level of giving to a central fund as well, which I believe is also in part due to the fact that it really needs to be updated, refreshed, promoted, and tools available to promote the use of that, and values around why it exists and why it's so important to contribute. Because we do have a number of schools that continue year after year to have a large surplus. And I don't think that's the purpose of fundraising. To speak to Trustee Laskin's previous point, it's not to accumulate a large amount of money. It just subjects us to so many potential concerns. It's really to be used within a defined period for defined purposes. And so I think this will be able to, as we promote this and make it more available and more awareness created about this, I do think that people sitting on a large amount of funding can then reconsider what it is being used for and hopefully donate more of that.
And just through the chair, with respect to the information you requested about the schools and everything, we will be able to include that in what we report via Trustee Weekly.
Okay, thank you very much as ever. And then just one comment, and that just what I've heard from constituents who reviewed this was that they were really, what they noticed lacking was something around the early vision of the fundraising policy. And if I may, I can read two principles that they stated, if that's helpful. I just want to make sure I capture it because I was not aware of this. It was around funds being used to enrich student experience, but not fill gaps, which provincial grants cover. And then the recognition of the wide inequities created when some schools are able to fundraise far more than others. And so they offered, by way of feedback, that in the early engagement documents that we seek to front load a bit about the initial vision of the fundraising policy. So I just add that comment in for staff consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Earhart. Up next, we have Trustee King. Please go ahead.
Through the chair, thank you. I just really wanted to thank Senior Manager again, because I appreciate the exercise of really explaining and promoting the central fund. I think from what you mentioned earlier, it sounds like it's something that really receives contributions through donations and through other external sources, but I'm not sure how much it's known or really utilized by school councils. So just really appreciate the explanation that you're providing there, and then the promotion of whatever it is as it possibly evolves with consultation. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee King, and Trustee Arts. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I just based on Trustee King's comment, I just wanted to highlight from some of my schools, one of the complaints in the past about the Central Equity Fund was that it was never defined and there was no report about how the board used the money. So it was just in very vague terms. And I think a really important shift during the pandemic that we saw was that, and you can see this online if you go to the School Cash online and you pick Central Equity Fund, you can actually now contribute to specific funds. So you can contribute to technology, winter coats, I can't remember, there's some other ones. And I think the encouraging schools that do fundraise to contribute centrally, it does help if we have projects that a myriad of projects that would speak to them and perhaps goals that they want to support, as opposed to I know, as I said, being on councils years ago and getting feedback from my schools, even my schools, quite a few of my schools do twin and they contribute to another school. And none of them have been particularly interested in contributing to the Central Equity Fund. And it's too vague. It feels like they're handing money over to the board and they don't know where it's going. So I would say that focus piece about letting them choose a kind of project or giving them reports on where their money is going to be used after they fundraise it would be helpful.
Thank you, Trustee Arts. Seeing no further comments or questions on this item, I want to thank Associate Director Sirikos, am I saying that right?
Sarisco,
Zucker, Executive Officer Snyder, Senior Manager Green, and Ms. Linda for their work on this item. And we'll need a mover and seconder, please.
Sriskandarajah.
Trustee Sriskandarajah and
Chernis Lynn.
Chernis Lynn, thank you. All those in favor, or Raj Singham in favor?
Chernis Lynn in favor.
Trustee Earhart in favor.
Sriskandarajah in favor.
Trustee Dodd in favor.
Oh, Trustee Pei, can you repeat your vote?
Not in favor.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Shen, are you back? Are you in the meeting? I don't think so. I don't hear him. And that item carries. Okay. Moving on to our final report of this evening, out of admissions policy.
Thank you. And through you, Chair Raja Kulasingham. Am I saying that properly? I invite, please, our system superintendent, Diana Pangiotopoulos, to talk about mostly housekeeping changes to this policy, but then a little bit more. Thanks, Diana.
Thanks very much, and through the chair. The out-of-area admissions policy as presented today has a couple of minor changes. First, the current policy identifies students who self-identify as First Nations, Métis, and Inuit access to schools outside of the out-of-area admissions policy. Clarification is being provided in this new update to specifically reflect that the access is for regular programs in schools. This does not include special education and inclusion intensive support programs, French language, central student interest programs, and caring and safe, because they have their own procedures. So that's the first change. The second change that I'd like to highlight is our students who are attending a school that is not by their designated school by address, and instead they are attending that school because of the preschool care. In this case, we're looking at clarifying that students who depart the before and after school care program will now include that if the student ceases to attend the program before the end of grade 3, they must apply throughout area admissions to remain at that school. And the third and final is another minor change, is a clarification around siblings. The applicant must either be a sibling or attend the feeder school. They do not need to be both, which is a clarification on the previous policy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, System Superintendent Pangiotopoulos. Seeing no further comments or questions on this item.
Sorry, I have a question.
Please go ahead, Trustee Suskandarajah.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, just to get clarification for the Indigenous students, does that mean that they can apply to schools that are closed for out-of-area admissions? I just want to know in case I get this request.
That's correct.
Okay, good. Thank you. And my other question I have is to do with the sibling requirements. And this, might not be the space. I just want some clarification while we're on the topic, but through you, Chair. So I get asked this once in a while. What happens if a child is applying for optional attendance, let's say a child in grade 2, they get accepted to it, and they have a sibling in grade 7, and we give priority to that the sibling that's older in grade 7. Is that the case? Or do they, because they're older and able to walk to their own home school, because I know one of the reasons we have this policy in place is because we want parents to be able to drop their kids off. And I'm getting complaints from other parents saying that the policy is being misused because these kids aren't getting dropped off, that they could actually walk to their closer school, their home school. So I just wanted to, it's just been a while since I've looked at this policy in its entirety.
Thank you. And through you to Diana.
Thank you. The sibling aspect of the policy does not distinguish between students who can walk to their local school. It's all siblings as long as they both attend the school. So a student, for example, with a sibling in grade 6, if the school ends in grade 6, they would not be considered a sibling. But if the school is K to 8, then they would be considered a sibling. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So they would still qualify for the sibling priority that we give. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate that clarification, and maybe in the future that's something we factor in. Okay, thank you so much for your work on this.
Thank you, Trustee Suskandarajah. Trustee Dawson, please go ahead.
Thank you. And through the chair, I have a question about the child care and the before and after care. So I'm thinking about families who might lose their job and subsequently not have a need or even be able to afford to pay for before and after care. but that they are looking for a new job, at which time they would resume before and after care. Are these kinds of, and so this is a very specific scenario, but assuming that there are many nuanced scenarios like that, how are we responding to those? Is there flexibility, or is it really very cut and dry? You must move schools, and then that school that they go to may or may not have a before and after care problem or program, which poses a problem for the parents when they do get employment.
Through the chair, Diana, please.
So Reiko and I will answer it. Reiko, go ahead.
So the priorities that are outlined, sorry, through the chair, the priorities that are outlined as part of the out-of-area admissions policy and procedures takes into account when a family may cease their before and after school care, but to support educational continuity, they are given that higher priority to remain at that school. Recognizing that there are many reasons why a family might stop before and after school care. This is, however, not a guarantee, as there needs to be seats available, but as the student is already attending the school, they would just be applying to remain at the school even though they no longer had the before and after school care requirement.
Okay, thank you. And so they would receive the highest priority over even siblings? Like what order of priority are they done in?
Siblings would come first.
Okay, so you would dismiss a student from a school over, okay. I take issue with that. Just gonna say, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Dawson. Let me just check if there are any, oh, Trustee Earhart, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask about communication. So through the chair, I just know that for out-of-area admissions policy is one that I frequently get constituency messages on. Just a lack of awareness that a change in program in particular can trigger an out-of-area admission, a need for an out-of-area admissions action, and then they lose access to the school. And this happens across many schools that I'm hearing this. The particular circumstance that I most frequently hear is the identification of a special need. And based on that identification of special need, a decision is made to change programs from French to English. And as the ward I represent is fairly geographically condensed, it does for them result in a need to go through an out-of-area admissions policy to remain an English stream. And so for many families, that generates an enormous amount of stress because they are not aware when they make the decision to change. They're not necessarily aware that that will trigger a need to apply for out-of-area admissions. And so I want to make sure that we're clearly communicating any changes to the policy, as well as that we continue to encourage a supportive environment for families navigating these potential changes. So that's what I wanted to ask through the chair.
Thank you, and through the chair, if I may, just in response to that. So thank you very much, Trustee Earhart. We'll take that feedback that you're receiving from families under advisement and speak to our principals, particularly if you're hearing it from our French immersion schools, just to be really clear and supportive with families about our policies and processes. So thank you for that feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Earhart. Trustee Dawson, please go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. Okay, I just thought of another scenario. So I had a scenario with a family where the parent who was bringing the children to school was disabled and was not able to walk on sidewalks to the neighborhood school and had to choose an out-of-area school that was very clearly along a bus route. So the principal was able to accommodate the family, and through this out-of-area admission, they were attending the school, but due to the two children's exceptionalities, they needed to leave the French immersion program and go into the regular program. At that point, it was a different optional attendance process, I guess. So my question is, these situations come up a lot, and I wonder what discretion the principal has in overriding this policy to accommodate somebody like a disabled parent who can't get their child to school if they're not on that route. So I'm trying to understand the delineation between discretion of the principal and 100% enforcement of the policy.
Thank you. And for the question, Trustee Dawson, through the chair, I can see that Diana would like to respond.
Thank you. In extenuating circumstances that you're describing, there is discretion with the principal and the superintendent to look at situations. And I would also add, in terms of the childcare question that you just asked, students, and want to be really clear about this, students are allowed to complete their year, and they're not asked to be moved immediately, so they are asked to complete their year. If there is a space available when they wish to return or able to return to the childcare, if it's within the same year, then that can be looked at, but it's not for the following year. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I appreciate that answer. And through the chair, I still have concerns about not allowing students to continue to attend a school because of the job loss of a parent. That in and of itself creates so much upheaval within a family, and maintaining some consistency for children, while it may take a year for a parent to find another job. These are the kinds of situations I'm seeing in my ward. And as we move into further economic downturn, I just see it becoming a widespread issue. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Dawson. Seeing no further comments or questions, we'll need a mover and seconder for this report.
Sriskandararajan.
Trustee Sriskandararajan, seconded by
Chernes Lynn.
Chernes Lynn. Thank you. And now we'll open the vote on this item.
Chernes Lynn in favor.
Trustee Earhart, how do you vote?
And Trustee Pay?
And Trustee Pay.
Oh, Trustee Earhart in favor.
Okay, and Trustee Pay.
Trustee Pay, not in favor.
Okay, thank you. I think so. Okay, and that carries. Next, we have two items up for information only. So if any trustees have questions or comments on these items, staff are here to answer any questions. Okay. Seeing and hearing none, before we move on to adjournment, I just want to thank our team at Governance Services today. They're here as a solo team without Senior Manager Ms. Joseph Dowers, and I think they're doing a phenomenal job. Yay!
Great job.
Thank you.
And now adjournment. May I get a mover and seconder?
Chernes Lynn.
Sriskandararajan, and I heard Chernes Lynn. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
There we go.
Oh, I had a question on this one. I apologize.
Oh,
Information only, but I may have missed my window.
what do you do? Okay,
I apologize.
if you can, Leola's available and she's ready to speak to you. So if you can connect with her offline, she's there to answer any questions.
Yeah, I'll say if I may to all the trustees, just to make a comment that the promoting respect in the workplace procedure mentioned trustees 7 times. So my question was why that one was for information only when trustees were within the scope. That was the question.
Okay, so Leola's here and she's made note of it and she's going to connect with you afterwards.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone.